It's the Monday Morning Show. Today is May 8th, 2020, and I'm Ken Salle. I'm the guy behind DC Home, which works out pretty well because today we're going inside DC Home. During the first season of DC Home, I recorded one of these inside episodes after every 5 episodes of the show. This season, I waited until we were about halfway through before speaking up. Also, I forgot. Can I blame it on COVID? I set up Season 2 of DC Home back at the end of Season 1. I knew back then that Sherry and Sean would be homeless, living in a storage unit. Sherry lost the bar and they lost their home after the government shutdown of 2019. Because Trump has been ruining Americans' lives a whole lot longer than COVID. Old Herbert put them up for a short time, and that was about a year ago. So, when Season 2 began, they had been living in that storage unit for more than half a year. Imagine having all of your belongings with you inside the storage unit where you're trying to make your home. A miniature 10-foot by 20-foot suite. And of course you lost most of your belongings precisely because your new suite is only 10 feet by 20 feet. And also because you're splitting it 4 ways. Which gives you 2.5 feet by 5 feet to live in and store all of your worldly belongings in and escape from. I don't judge anyone who has fallen during these horrible times, by which I mean the Trump years. I can only hope things get better, and part of my reason for telling the stories of Sherry, Sean, and Old Herbert is to share a little empathy into the lives of everyday people who are punched in the face every day by the Republicans. As you can probably imagine, 2.5 by 5 feet of living space is not an awful lot. Even before social distancing, it was too close. Old Herbert, Sherry, Sean, and Alicia, an elderly friend of Old Herbert's, all lived together and they try to give each other some space, but of course it isn't enough. And I had no way of knowing COVID was on the way when I put them in this storage unit. But in hindsight, it almost looks like they're getting ready for something. Something is coming to hit them. The obvious choice for that something would, of course, be Trump. Trump spends his days looking for ways to make Americans more miserable. So it's an easy choice. And in the second episode this season, which I called State of the Union, Old Herbert sits down to talk with Sean about the dangers of electing psychopaths, but also the dangers of late capitalism. The only problem is, I haven't really gone into very much detail about Old Herbert. He played more of a supporting role in Season 1, and I never felt the need to really explain his actions or his voice. The thing is, Old Herbert is a schizophrenic, like me. But of course, he's nothing like me because there are just as many kinds or flavors of schizophrenia as there are schizophrenics. My own symptoms are my own personal business, and I didn't really want to put mine on display. Rather than do that, I decided to make Old Herbert his own kind of schizophrenic. So, first of all, Old Herbert is old, okay? He's really old. Older than me. That's old. Secondly, Old Herbert, like most schizophrenics, manages his own world his own way. He's very non-traditional. Notice the living arrangements. He has very specific ideas about things, such as his fantasy of sitting in a treehouse and watching the sun go down with Nicole Wallace of NBC sitting beside him. This also happens to be one of my fantasies. I think Nicole Wallace has a serious kind of sixth-grade girlfriend vibe about her. I think she could hold hands and watch the sunset and talk about our day in school like nobody's business. Also, old Herbert has some very different ideas about speech. You might have noticed. You might think that I feel some kind of attachment with old Herbert, but the truth is, I never really liked old Herbert. He slipped in without my permission, and in the course of 23 episodes, I've come to really appreciate this little schizophrenic part of my personality that has come out to play. I wrote episode 18, Medal of Hate, after Rush Limbaugh received the highest award the United States can bestow upon one of her citizens, the Medal of Freedom, to a man who preaches hate, spreads lies and misinformation, and works hard every day to destroy the United States of America. You might say the whole thing rang of cognitive dissonance. You can also say it's what happens when a hate monger is allowed to steal the highest office in the land. Either way, I knew I had to write something. I didn't know what. I sat down at my keyboard, put Sherry in a job over at WGNO, an underground radio station I put underneath the underpass by Benjamin Benneker Park. Benjamin Benneker Park, by the way, is just outside of Washington, D.C., near the Arlington Cemetery. I felt that gave the station just the right hint of irony. And I loaded the station with all sorts of the kinds of personalities you would expect to find at a right-wing hate factory. Let's see, there's Damien DeLuco, who hosted Stop Complaining and Let's Talk About Celebrity Genitals from midnight to 6 every weekday morning. On weekends, they ran repeats of whatever rated well that week, which usually wasn't Damien DeLuco. Then, at 6 a.m., on the spot, rain or shine, every morning like clockwork, chimed the familiar voice of Alan Oswald Watts, who was also known as Self-Righteous Fat-Ass in the Morning. Yes, I ripped that right out of the episode. We authors do that. Alan Oswald Watts was the guy who was supposed to be the next Rush Limbaugh. This was something I could relate to in my own life, as I have spent far too many of my days waiting for my chance, for my opportunity to shine. The only difference between myself and Alan Oswald Watts, short of the hate and the other loathsome attributes, is that I stopped waiting for my chance, and I decided to make things happen for myself. Alan Oswald Watts has not reached this place, and that's too bad, because when Limbaugh received that medal, it tarnished the medal for all time, sure, but it also tarnished the chances of Alan Oswald Watts. Before COVID could cross the ocean and ruin our fun, however, Trump went on a pardoning spree, letting everyone who kissed his ass free as Limbaugh. That's still going on, by the way. Today, Trump got off Michael Flynn. He also got him out of jail. And watching this fat orange turd delight in harming our nation and our people, I wondered, how are people supposed to feel safe when the worst villain holds all the power? And I wrote episode 19, Justice Gets a Pardon. And I put Sherry in an Airbnb over near Watts Branch Playground. And I think I got some of the geography wrong, which I should warn you is bound to happen. And as I reread this episode, it feels like someone was waiting. As if Sherry had just one last chance to breathe before the world collapsed in on her. She remembered her sister, who was shot down in Las Vegas. At least COVID has helped temper our trigger fingers, for now. And as she walked old familiar streets, I talked about how I had done the same. I had walked my old neighborhood, remembering my old friends, my old life. One last chance before COVID came up and tossed our lives up in the air the way a child might lose at Monopoly. And then COVID came. I was writing about it before I was living in it because when COVID hit, our nation was still holding thousands and thousands of small children in squalid living conditions, inside of prisons, inside of cages, in the very conditions where diseases such as COVID spreads. Those children are in there today as I record this. And now we know that the Trump administration has denied those children with any care for the virus. We aren't being told how many are sick. We aren't being told how many have died. But just as surely as the German people were responsible and were rightly held accountable for the deaths they stood by and watched or ignored, depending on their want, so too should the American people be held responsible and accountable for every child who dies, is sick, for every child whose life was ruined by our neglect, by our apathy. This virus didn't wait around in the camps, or inside the inner cities, or inside the prisons, or inside the nursing homes, or the hospitals, or the factories. COVID didn't play nice. And that was probably warranted, because let's face it, neither did we. We cheered our medical professionals while forcing them to labor in dangerous conditions. We paid lip service to the U.S. Postal Service and the folks at the grocery store while disrespecting just a whole lot of common sense. I don't need to tell you. This has not been America's finest hour. Hell, I can't remember when we had our finest hour. Any guesses? Because I don't think any of us were alive for it. Vicki and I were watching the news one afternoon around the middle of March. Vicki was still going into her office to work. I was still working in my studio. And when Governor Newsom called the stay-at-home order the right move, we knew our lives were going to change. I knew the lives of the people living in DC home storage would change as well. But I had no idea how much. You see, my plan has always been to keep Sherry and Sean moving, to reflect the way lives are buffeted by political choices that don't account for people such as they. But when Tony and his daughter Daisy took over operations at DC Home Storage, and when they found out about old Herbert and Sherry and Alicia and Sean and all the others, I knew the party was over at DC Home. I still don't know what's going to happen to them. I won't know until it happens. I like growing this series organically, and not because I want this to happen or that to happen. I like being surprised. And that takes us to and through the last two episodes. A nation without integrity must surely fail. Sometimes I think my titles are a little too on the nose. And a pauper among thieves. It's difficult to look around at what's happening in the world and believe anything is normal or will be normal for any length of time moving forward. Armed citizens are storming the gates of our state's capitals while the evil Mogwai who ate after midnight and his gremlin buddies in the Senate make their daily announcement of what new atrocity they have brought to our shores. Deadly plague? Got that. Concentration camp? Got those too. Before you know it, we'll even have cholera, maybe even Ebola, but only if we're very, very good. When everything in our world is upside down, I am left to write an even more upside down world in DC Home. Because these are the frail, the ones our democracy let down. And yes, I'm including Alan Oswald Watts, self-righteous fat ass in the morning over at WGNO. Our democracy fails us not just when it gets the occasional pandemic, but every day we allow lies and hate to be a part of our national discourse. Because that's all the Republicans trade in. And that's not a fair trade. My whole reason for releasing an episode of Inside DC Home now is because I know what's in store for Sherry and Sean, old Herbert and Alicia, Tony and Daisy, Alan Oswald Watts, and everyone else, and I don't look forward to writing it. We live in momentous times when seemingly half of us are so hypnotized by Trump's fat ass we can't even see the body bags. Getting out of this is not going to be easy. Thank you for listening to DC Home, along with this episode of Inside DC Home. And I hope you enjoy listening as much as I've enjoyed bringing them to you. Look for a new episode. Wait, this says next week. This says next week! Until next time, be good to yourself, be kind to others, and let's make this world a better place.